Hello, welcome to Art Bytes from the Marianna Kistler Beach Museum of Art. My name is Kim Richards and I'm an education assistant at the museum. And today I'd like to share with you this color lithograph created by Richard Florsheim. It is entitled Airport and it was made in 1964 and published in 1965. Florsheim lived from 1916 to 1979. He was born in Chicago, Illinois, and attended private school there and had an early interest in poetry and painting. By the time he finished high school, he then spent a year in New York studying with Aaron Burrard, who's also another painter from Chicago. And then he went back home and studied and went to the University of Chicago for a year. He left school and wanted to go to Europe to study art and convinced his dad, with the help of a professor, to fund that trip. So he spent 2 years studying in France, Italy, other parts of Central Europe, and the Near East. By the 1939, he was back home in Chicago and had set up a studio and began creating lithographs the next year, and even had a two-man show before he entered World War II. In 1942, he joined the Navy and worked as a cartographer until the war was over. After the war, he came back to Chicago and resumed his art career. And the art that he was making at that time was very somber. It reflected the experiences that he had seen during the war. And by the late 1940s, he had also began to establish the Midwest Artists Guild and was teaching some in a couple of different schools. By the 50s, his art career was really on the roll. He's starting to sell art in New York. He has some galleries representing him there. And you started to see him really develop his style. In the mid-1950s, he experimented a little bit with woodcut and really liked the texture that came through when he printed from the wood. And later you'll see that effect used in his lithography. During the 50s and the 60s, he joins with the Associated American Artists Gallery. And they were big promoters of his work, using exhibitions and catalogs and mailers to promote what Florsheim was doing. And he actually became one of their most popular artists. They always made sure to have his prints in inventory because they were very popular. What we can see here on this slide are some of the kind of known techniques of his. He liked to use these patterns, and he created them with these geometric shapes. And then you see a lot of toning and shading going on in his black and white prints. He had studios by this time in Chicago and in Provincetown, Massachusetts. So you'll also see the inspiration of cityscapes and landscapes from Chicago, as well as the seascapes from Provincetown. And in both of them, he applies the same ideas of pattern with the shapes and the shading, where he gets a lot of reflection too. I mentioned the woodcuts earlier and how he liked that look of the wood that came through on his print. He tried to create that and kind of played around with color washes in his lithographs to get that effect. And I think you can see an example of that here in this piece called Low Tide, which is a seascape. And you also are starting to see his use of light. That's another thing he really focused on, was he liked to play with the idea of distortion, light distortion, and the refraction of light. And so I think you can see those elements come into play in this piece, where he's got the light distorted and reflected all the way through. the image to kind of create this uniformity, and then these great color washes to create that ambiance and the lyricalness of a seascape. But let's take a longer look at Airport, which is our featured piece today. And I think it's important to note that you can really see the mature style in this piece, and all of the elements that he had been working on throughout his career kind of come together here. So as you take a moment to look at Airport, where do you notice the blocks and the patterning coming in? How effective do you think his color washes are in creating a mood? And also, how is he using this idea of distorted light and refracted light to the advantage of the artist, kind of to pull you as the viewer into the piece? How does he successfully do that, if you think he does successfully do that? And how does it all come together then to create this cityscape of an airport? If you've enjoyed looking at the pieces of Florsheim's from our permanent collection, I would encourage you to get out online and find other pieces by Richard Florsheim, the painter and printmaker. And thank you for joining us for Art Bytes.